This is one of the things when you talk about the changing of residence and exile, how it works, the separation. The thing for me is people get confused. You know, they think it's like I've decided to like become Russian and forget that I'm American or something like that. But I'm not giving up my American citizenship. I'm not any less American tomorrow than I am today. And I think actually, I'd like to think it's the same for you, because the government has a problem doesn't mean that you have a problem. Like, it doesn't make you less Chinese to think differently than the Communist Party. I would argue that actually makes you more someone of the country, of the nation, and separate from the government. But so many people today, they think of as the government and the nation as the same. But I think they're separate, you know, and in so many places we see governments that hold different politics than the people. And the people, there's two problems that we have generally. One is that the people don't know what the government is doing. And then there's a second problem that people do know what the government is doing, but they either don't care, they don't think it's serious, or they do care and they don't think they can do anything about it. They don't think they have the power to change it. And this is something that I wanted to ask you because I think it's really interesting. You know, so much of the Chinese perspective is not, you don't really hear it in Western media because, you know, the Chinese state, the Communist Party, they put forth these voices that are just completely pro-government. They explain away the most terrible things. And then you have the voices of people like you who have made enormous sacrifices to say something different, to say something honest and independent and true. But at the same time, people like you and me who have faced so many consequences for saying what we've seen and what's actually going on, that people begin to think of us as not normal, as separate from like the average person, the ordinary person. And what's missing in that conversation is what the average person in China thinks. So what I wanted to ask you, based on my experience in the United States, in this surveillance scandal in 2013, where we saw the United States government was breaking the law, violating the Constitution, its basic principles, to spy on people in the United States and around the world in ways that it wasn't allowed to do, but they still did it anyway because it gave them power. And then you ask, you know, you think about what all these political figures, these elite figures think, and then they ask what all these media figures think. But somewhere in the middle of that, what's lost is what the ordinary person thought. And I've come away with this feeling because all the elite figures say, ordinary people don't care. But when I go and speak at universities, when I speak to normal people, when I have a talk in private, everybody cares. The problem is they don't feel like they can change it. They feel like they don't have the power to change it because the government decides these things for them. The legislatures, even after elections, decide things for them. And our elections, where, you know, in places in the world where we have elections, are increasingly becoming not a choice of who you're for out of all these people, but who you're against. And people vote against keeping the bad guy out of office instead of putting a good guy in office. When I think about, you know, my interactions with journalists in all the years since, one of the questions that came up repeatedly is, like, why me? Why did I do something when there's, you know, 30,000 other people at the NSA who didn't do things? And, you know, I've had a lot of answers in a lot of different ways that I've thought about it over the years. Not everybody knew all the things that I knew, of the people who knew all the things that I knew, because the offices that I had worked in, because the experiences that I've had, because of the accesses I could have. I could see new parts of, you know, what this part of the government was doing, this part of the government. And not everybody shared that, right? So it's already a smaller group that can do this. And then of that smaller group, there's an even smaller group of those who actually plausibly could get this information out of the building And these are largely workers in technology, who can do this kind of thing. And then there's the people in technology who actually have the training, like I was at the CIA, who think they could, get it out of the building and not get noticed. And then, people who could talk to journalists. And so it's a smaller and smaller group. And, there's this question of, all right, was it really just me? Or were there more people who could have done it and didn't do it because they were afraid, or this, that, or the other? And I think there were more people who could do it, and they were just afraid to do it, or they didn't care that much to do it because I was afraid to do it, and I didn't want to do it. And I waited a really long time until I actually did do it. And so maybe I waited too long, actually. And then I talked to journalists, and the story goes on from there. But for you, when you think about the fact that you've been pretty successful, and in a lot of power structures in government, particularly when you're not dealing with national security agencies and these big police states, they've got two ways of trying to keep people silent. One is fear, that there will be some consequence, there will be some punishment. And the other one is inducement, where they try to reward you, they try to, make you more successful. They try to buy you out, basically. How is it that with your experience, you found the courage to not only speak against the system, but to continuously do it, to keep going? It's not about being against, communism or anything specifically. It's anti-authoritarianism. And this is something that in the United States and a lot of Western countries, I think, has actually been forgotten. Because we, whether it's on the left or the right, we're normally talking about center-left and center-right of politics. And this means, it's more of the structural, institutional, corporate left or right. They're very interested in the making of rules and the declaration of rules and the systemization of rules that they are writing, right? Whether they're on the left or the right, they all agree the government tells you what to do, you follow it. As opposed to the more traditional liberal idea, where we have the very fewest rules necessary for society to sort of continue peacefully. Now, one of the criticisms that I faced tremendously within my government, and I still face from critics, is, okay, whether or not what Snowden did was right or wrong, whether or not what the government did was right or wrong, whether what the government did was moral or immoral or legal or illegal, what Snowden did was against the law. And so there's kind of this replacement of the individual's idea of right and wrong, society's idea of right and wrong, with the rule of law. And we understand the rule of law. We think the rule of law is a good thing generally. But when the rule of law spreads so far, and the application of law, the creation of law by politics, begins to narrow what you can do so much, that now speech is against the law, even when it's saying something that the public needs to hear, should have heard. It never should have been secret in the first place. How do you think about this idea, even if there is majority support, that things can be made illegal, that maybe should not be possible to make illegal? And like, when you say anti-authoritarian, what do you mean? That what are the limits of authority? What are the limits of lawmaking in a society? Or should they be? And how should ordinary people who are doing everything they can within the law to dissent or object but can't achieve anything, how should they think about this conflict, this tension? Mass surveillance and the controversy that resulted from it. We changed laws in the United States. We changed laws in Europe as a result of this reporting. Policies were changed, and it's like, okay, great. But the system itself didn't really change meaningfully. The laws that were changed were small laws. They were made more to reassure people to release some pressure against the system than they were actually to stop the abuses that had happened. And along with the passage of these sort of new light reform laws,